The air inside the Fairfax County Courthouse hung heavy and still, thick with the musty smell of aged paper and the quiet desperation of those seeking justice or resolution. Poppy Petrova, her threadbare coat a stark contrast to the building's grandeur, stood anxiously before the imposing oak doors of courtroom 4B. Her knuckles shone white as she tightly gripped the small, fidgeting hands of her 2-year-old twins, Leo and Luna. Inside those doors, her husband, Spencer Montgomery, was seated beside his mistress, a breathtakingly beautiful woman. Both were adorned in designer clothing that undoubtedly cost more than Poppy's entire year's rent. They were there to finalize a divorce that threatened to leave Poppy stripped bare, bereft of everything she held dear. But Spencer and Bianca were blissfully unaware that Poppy wasn't just bringing her children to this hearing. She was carrying with her a truth so earth-shatteringly potent that it would obliterate their carefully constructed, perfect world. And it would all unfold before a judge who possessed an insight that ran far deeper than anyone could possibly imagine. The marble hallway of the Fairfax County Courthouse was a chilling, impersonal expanse, deliberately designed to make those who traversed it feel insignificant. Every footstep echoed ominously, a solitary sound bouncing off the impossibly high, indifferent ceilings. For Poppy Petrova, each echo served as a stark reminder of how small and inconsequential she had been systematically made to feel. She squeezed the tiny hands of her twins, Leo and Luna, even tighter. Leo, possessing his father's serious, probing brown eyes, gazed up at her, his little brow furrowed in confusion. Luna, a miniature, blonde-haired replica of Poppy herself, buried her face in the worn, comforting fabric of her mother's coat, whimpering softly. "It's okay, my loves," Poppy whispered, her voice a fragile thing in the echoing vastness. "Mommy's here. It will all be over soon." It was a lie, and a particularly cruel one at that, because deep down she knew the truth. Nothing about this day would be over soon. In reality, it was only the beginning of the end, or perhaps more accurately, the end of the beginning. For years prior, she had walked into a different government building filled with boundless hope and optimism to formally marry Spencer Montgomery. He was then, as he was now, a rising star in the cutthroat world of Northern Virginia real estate development, a man whose effortless charm was as powerful as his insatiable ambition. She, on the other hand, was a quiet, unassuming librarian, drawn to his seemingly boundless energy and his enticing promises of a life overflowing with security and unwavering love. The initial 2 years of their marriage passed in a dizzying blur of happiness and contentment. Together, they built a beautiful home in the prestigious community of Great Falls, the backyard of which offered stunning panoramic views of the Potomac River. Spencer was incredibly attentive, seemingly devoted to her every need. When she excitedly revealed that she was pregnant with twins, he had lifted her high into the air, joyously proclaiming himself the luckiest man alive. The twins, he declared, were his legacy, the future inheritors of the Montgomery name. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Bianca Langley swaggered into their carefully orchestrated lives. Poppy first caught sight of Bianca at a charity gala that Spencer had relentlessly insisted they attend. Bianca was everything Poppy wasn't, and seemingly everything she could never be. She was impossibly chic, sporting raven hair meticulously cut into a severe, yet stylish bob, and exuding a confidence that verged on outright arrogance. She held the position of senior associate at a rival development firm, and she immediately latched onto Spencer with the unwavering focus of a seasoned predator. Poppy had watched, a knot of icy dread tightening in the pit of her stomach, as Spencer's attention subtly shifted, at first almost imperceptibly, then completely and irrevocably. The excuses began innocently enough. Late nights at the office. Business trips that mysteriously stretched over entire weekends. Soon enough, the excuses gave way to a chilling coldness, the dismissive wave of his hand whenever she attempted to engage in meaningful conversation. The final, devastating blow came 6 months ago when he casually announced that he was leaving. He had already secretly secured an apartment in Arlington, a sleek, modern space that he now openly shared with Bianca. He had also, with calculated cruelty, frozen their joint accounts, leaving Poppy with a rapidly dwindling savings account and 2 young toddlers completely dependent on her. His divorce petition was brutal in its calculated cruelty. It painted her as an emotionally unstable, utterly unfit mother, demanding full custody of the children he hadn't even bothered to see in weeks. He offered her a pittance of a settlement, but it was contingent upon her surrendering all parental rights. "It's for the best, Poppy," his lawyer, a silver-haired shark named Mr. Gideon, had coldly informed her over the phone. "The children will be raised with the resources they rightfully deserve. You, on the other hand, can start over." "Start over," Poppy had repeated, incredulous. Leo and Luna were not some rough draft of a life that she could simply discard. They were her entire world, her reason for being. So, she fought back with every ounce of strength she could muster. She used what little money she had left to hire a legal aid lawyer, a young, earnest, but visibly overwhelmed man named David Chun. And she had arrived here today with her children in tow, because she simply couldn't afford a babysitter, to face the man she had once loved and the woman who had ruthlessly destroyed her family. The heavy doors to courtroom 4B swung open with a resounding thud. A bailiff, his face etched with weary resignation, called out the case in a monotone voice. "Montgomery versus Montgomery, custody and divorce hearing." Poppy took a deep, fortifying breath, straightened her back, and walked into the courtroom, her head held high. The room was surprisingly smaller than she had anticipated, paneled in dark wood that seemed to absorb every last ray of light. Spencer and Bianca were already seated at the plaintiff's table, exuding an air of smug self-assurance. Spencer, looking every bit the successful executive in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit from Savile Row, pointedly refused to even glance in her direction. He stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, his jaw clenched in a hard, unyielding line. Bianca, however, deliberately turned her head slowly, a venomous smile playing on her perfectly sculpted lips. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost 3 months of Poppy's old salary. Her eyes, cold and devoid of any warmth, flickered dismissively down to the twins, and her perfect smile twisted into a sneer of undisguised contempt. The message was clear. You, and your messy, inconvenient children, simply do not belong here. Poppy resolutely ignored her blatant attempts at intimidation. She led Leo and Luna to the respondents' table where David Chun was nervously shuffling a stack of papers, his anxiety palpable. He offered her a weak, somewhat encouraging smile. "They shouldn't be here, Poppy," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously towards the judge's empty chair. "It doesn't look good." "I have no choice, David," Poppy replied, her voice low but firm, laced with determination. She carefully settled the children onto the bench beside her, discreetly pulling a small, tattered picture book and 2 quiet puzzles from her oversized bag. "They are the reason we're here," she thought fiercely. Let the court see them. Let their father finally see them. But Spencer remained stubbornly oblivious. He was leaning in, whispering something in Bianca's ear, his expression animated. Bianca laughed, a low, throaty sound that was utterly out of place in the solemn atmosphere of the courtroom. The sound cut through Poppy like a shard of glass, sharp and painful. It was the sound of victory, of unearned entitlement, of a battle they were absolutely certain they had already won. A sharp rap of a gavel cut through the suffocating tension. "All rise," the bailiff called out in his droning voice. An older woman, with a severe bun of gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing, walked in and took her seat at the bench. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering for a moment on Spencer and Bianca, then shifting to Poppy and finally, with a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, resting on the 2 small children sitting quietly with their puzzles. "The Honorable Judge Mildred Carmichael presiding," the bailiff announced, his voice devoid of any inflection. "Please be seated." Judge Carmichael opened the file in front of her, her movements precise and economical. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of judicial neutrality, but her eyes, Poppy thought with a surge of hope, missed absolutely nothing. "Mr. Gideon," the judge said, her voice crisp and clear, brooking no argument. "You may begin." Mr. Gideon rose, exuding an air of smooth, unshakable confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are here today to address a straightforward, if unfortunate, matter. My client, Mr. Spencer Montgomery, seeks to dissolve his marriage to Miss Poppy Petrova. Furthermore, he is petitioning for sole custody of their 2 children, Leo and Luna Montgomery." He paused deliberately, letting the gravity of his words hang in the air before turning a pitying, almost condescending, look towards Poppy. "It is Mr. Montgomery's belief, supported by substantial evidence we will present today, that Miss Petrova is not currently capable of providing a stable and suitable environment for these children. Her emotional state has become erratic. Her financial situation is, frankly, dire. Mr. Montgomery, on the other hand, is prepared to offer them a life of unparalleled opportunity, unwavering stability, and the very best care." Poppy's blood ran cold, his words echoing in her ears like a death knell. Erratic, dire. He had engineered her financial situation through his calculated actions. He had deliberately caused her emotional distress, pushing her to the brink. She felt David place a calming hand on her arm, offering silent reassurance. "Stay calm," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's just rhetoric. We'll get our turn." But as Mr. Gideon launched into his carefully rehearsed opening statement, weaving a tapestry of blatant lies and carefully constructed half-truths, Poppy felt a crushing wave of despair wash over her. He made her sound like a hysterical, incompetent pauper, barely fit to care for herself, let alone 2 young children. He spoke at length of Spencer's inherent generosity, his deep and abiding pain at having to make this undeniably difficult decision, and his unwavering, unconditional love for his children. Through it all, Spencer stared straight ahead, a mask of stoic sorrow plastered on his undeniably handsome face. Bianca watched Poppy, her eyes glittering with undisguised triumph. It was a perfectly choreographed performance, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. And in that moment, Poppy knew, with a sinking feeling of dread, that this simply couldn't be a fair fight. They had all the money, all the power, and the very best lawyer in the entire state. All she had was the truth, a fragile and often unreliable weapon. She could only desperately pray that in a room built on rigid procedure and unwavering precedent, the truth, however simple, would somehow be enough. Mr. Gideon was undeniably a master of his craft, honed over years of ruthless courtroom battles. He moved around the courtroom with the predatory grace of a sleek panther, his movements fluid and deliberate. His voice, a carefully modulated instrument, could effortlessly convey sympathy, disappointment, and grave concern, often all in the very same sentence. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a captivating storyteller, expertly crafting a narrative designed to sway the judge. And the story he was telling was of a benevolent, undeniably successful man being tragically dragged down by a clinging, emotionally unstable wife. "Your Honor," Gideon began, his voice dripping with sincerity, "we will present undeniable evidence of Miss Petrova's increasing volatility. We have sworn testimony from a former neighbor, a Miss Jenkins, who will speak to documented episodes of significant distress, including shouting, uncontrollable crying, and even items being thrown within the home during the final months of the marriage." Poppy's jaw tightened involuntarily. Ms. Jenkins was an elderly woman whom Spencer had meticulously charmed, routinely bringing her groceries and fixing her leaky faucet, all in an effort to cultivate her favor. Poppy, meanwhile, had been deliberately isolated, struggling to cope with the immense stress of a crumbling marriage and the unrelenting demands of 2 young infants. The shouting had been her desperately begging Spencer not to leave, and the item thrown had been a single baby rattle, tossed in frustration into an empty crib after Spencer had stormed out of the house for the 3rd night in a row. They were twisting her pain, her raw, unadulterated grief, into a weapon to use against her. "Furthermore," Gideon continued, gesturing towards a thick binder resting on his table, "we have irrefutable financial records. Since the separation, Miss Petrova has rapidly depleted her savings. There are multiple declined debit card transactions, indicating a severe lack of funds. She has been forced to move into a small one-bedroom apartment in a less than desirable neighborhood. Is this truly the appropriate environment for the heirs to the Montgomery legacy? David Chun shot to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Gideon is deliberately mischaracterizing the situation. My client's precarious financial status is a direct result of Mr. Montgomery's calculated decision to cut off her access to marital assets. Judge Carmichael held up a hand, her expression stern. Sustained. Mr. Gideon, stick to the verifiable facts of your client's petition, not your subjective characterization of the respondent's circumstances. You will have your turn, Mr. Chen. Gideon gave a slight, deferential bow, acknowledging the judge's reprimand. Of course, Your Honor. The undeniable facts are that Mr. Montgomery has already established a multimillion-dollar trust fund specifically for his children's education and overall well-being. He has a spacious, secure home in a safe and desirable neighborhood. He has already enlisted the services of a highly recommended, full-time nanny to provide the children with exceptional care. He is, in every conceivable way, the more suitable parent. As he spoke, Bianca subtly shifted in her seat, placing a perfectly manicured hand possessively on Spencer's arm. It was a calculated gesture of supportive ownership, a silent declaration that she was an integral part of this new, stable life he was so confidently offering. She looked every bit the part of the perfect corporate wife, a woman who would undoubtedly manage a household with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to a complex business merger. Poppy looked down at her own hands, chapped and raw from washing countless baby bottles in a cramped, outdated kitchenette. She thought of her tiny apartment, which she had scrubbed meticulously clean and filled with love, even if it was undeniably short on both space and luxury. She thought of the countless sleepless nights spent walking the floor with a colicky Leo while Luna was simultaneously teething. Where was Spencer then? He was out building his new life, meticulously crafting his new image with Bianca. Judge Carmichael was watching them all, her expression unreadable, giving nothing away. Her eyes, however, seemed to linger on Bianca for a fleeting moment. Mr. Montgomery, the judge said suddenly, her voice cutting through Gideon's carefully constructed monologue. Is this woman? She gestured with her pen towards Bianca. Miss Bianca Langley, your current partner? Spencer was momentarily taken aback, clearly thrown off balance by the unexpected question. Yes, Your Honor. Bianca and I are together. She has been a tremendous source of support during this undeniably difficult time. I see, the judge said, making a small note on her pad. And does she intend to be involved in the children's lives, should you be granted sole custody? Absolutely, Spencer said, his confidence returning in full force. Bianca adores the twins. She looks forward to being a positive and influential figure in their upbringing. A small, choked sound involuntarily escaped Poppy's lips. Adores them? Bianca had met them exactly once, during a staged, 10-minute encounter in a park where she had barely even looked at them, spending far more time checking her reflection in her phone screen. Luna, perhaps sensing her mother's underlying distress, began to fuss. She squirmed uncomfortably on the bench and let out a small, plaintive cry. Mama, up! Poppy's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. This was exactly what she had feared, what David had so carefully warned her about. A disruption, irrefutable proof of her perceived inability to control her own children. She quickly reached into her bag and pulled out a small sippy cup of water and a cracker, murmuring soft, reassuring words to her daughter. Luna took the cup, her whimpers gradually subsiding into quiet sniffles as she leaned heavily against her mother, seeking comfort. Bianca rolled her eyes dramatically, a theatrical sigh escaping her lips, clearly meant for the judge to witness. It said, see, this is exactly what we're dealing with here. Pure chaos. Mr. Gideon seized the opportune moment. As you can see, Your Honor, even the solemnity of a courtroom is a challenge for Miss Petrova. A large home with dedicated playrooms and professional care is undeniably what these children require. He then proceeded to call his first witness, a child psychologist, Dr. Robert Peterson. Dr. Peterson was a slick, well-rehearsed professional who had clearly been paid handsomely for his undoubtedly biased testimony. He had conducted a 1-hour assessment of Spencer in his pristine Arlington apartment, conspicuously without the children even being present. "Dr. Peterson," Gideon asked, his voice smooth and persuasive, "based on your extensive evaluation of Mr. Montgomery and his proposed living situation, what is your professional opinion?" Dr. Peterson adjusted his glasses, his expression conveying an air of utmost seriousness. "In my professional opinion, Mr. Montgomery has undeniably created an environment that is not only financially secure, but also meticulously structured to provide optimal developmental support for the children. He has articulated a clear and thoughtful parenting plan. The inherent stability he offers is textbook for fostering healthy, successful children." "And what about the current situation with their mother?" Gideon pressed, his voice laced with subtle skepticism. "I have not personally evaluated Miss Petrova," Dr. Peterson admitted, his tone carefully measured. "But based on the documented financial and residential instability, a child's fundamental sense of security could be significantly undermined. Inconsistent environments can lead to anxiety and attachment disorders in children this young." Every word was a carefully chosen dart, designed to inflict maximum damage, and they all found their mark with unnerving accuracy. Poppy felt her fragile hope beginning to fray, unraveling thread by thread. They were constructing a gilded cage of lies around her, and she was trapped helplessly inside, forced to watch as they prepared to take her children away from her forever. Spencer wouldn't even look at her. He was a seasoned actor playing a role, expertly embodying the character of the concerned father, the wronged husband. He had so thoroughly convinced himself of his own carefully constructed fiction that he seemed to genuinely believe it. David Chun did his best during cross-examination, his efforts valiant but ultimately insufficient. "Dr. Peterson, you never actually met the children, did you?" "My evaluation was solely of the parental candidate, Mr. Montgomery." "So, you have no first-hand knowledge whatsoever of Ms. Petrova's parenting abilities or her undeniably strong bond with her children?" "I can only testify to what I have objectively observed," Dr. Peterson replied, his tone dismissive. "Which is a man who paid you a substantial fee for a favorable opinion." David muttered just loud enough for Poppy to hear, a spark of defiance in his voice. No further questions. It was a small, almost insignificant victory, but it felt hollow and meaningless. The damage had already been done. The narrative had been firmly established. Spencer represented stability and success. Poppy represented poverty and chaos. Judge Carmichael made another note, her pen scratching softly against the paper. She looked from the smug, self-satisfied face of Dr. Peterson to the anxious, weary face of Poppy, who was now quietly stroking Luna's hair as the little girl drifted peacefully to sleep on her lap. Leo sat beside them, his eyes wide and observant, watching everything with a seriousness far beyond his tender years. The judge's gaze was penetrating, as if she were looking past the carefully crafted legal arguments and trying to discern the very souls of the people in her courtroom. "We will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Carmichael announced, her voice even and controlled. "And when we return, we will hear from the respondent." As Spencer and Bianca swept out of the courtroom with their lawyer, laughing quietly amongst themselves, Poppy felt a tremor of fear course through her. Her turn was rapidly approaching. Her turn to fight back with her flimsy collection of hard-won truths against their imposing fortress of calculated lies. And she was overwhelmingly terrified that it simply wouldn't be nearly enough. The 15-minute recess felt like both a lifetime and no time at all, an eternity compressed into a fleeting moment. Poppy led the twins to a quiet corner of the echoing hallway, giving Leo a small juice box and gently rocking the now-sleeping Luna in her arms. David approached her, his face grim and etched with concern. "That was rough, Poppy," he said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Gideon is good. He's painting a picture, and right now it's the only one the judge has seen." "So, what do we do, David?" Poppy asked, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her underlying fear. "How do I fight this? I don't have paid experts or slick presentations. I just have this." From her bag, She carefully pulled out a small, worn photo album. It was the only tangible thing, aside from her children and a few essential pieces of clothing, that she had made absolutely certain to take from the house in Great Falls. David opened it, his expression softening as he turned the pages. The pages were filled with pictures from the last 2 years, a visual chronicle of their lives. Poppy, her face round and glowing with the radiant joy of pregnancy. Spencer, his features softened by a genuine, unforced smile, proudly holding his newborn son for the very first time. The twins in matching onesies, sleeping peacefully in their cribs. Birthday parties, trips to the park, messy spaghetti dinners. In every single photograph of the children, Poppy was there. Smiling, comforting, feeding, playing, a constant presence in their lives. Spencer appeared frequently in the first few pages, but his presence gradually faded, replaced by empty spaces at the dinner table and solo pictures of Poppy with the kids. The last dozen pages were exclusively of her and the twins, their bond evident in every frame. "This is your evidence, Poppy," David said, his voice gaining a sliver of newfound confidence. "This is the truth. You just have to tell it. Speak from the heart. Let the judge see the mother you truly are." When they were called back into the courtroom, Poppy felt a renewed, albeit fragile, sense of resolve wash over her, bolstering her spirits. She took her seat, carefully placing the photo album on the table in front of her, a silent testament to the love she held for her children. "Mr. Chun," Judge Carmichael said, her voice crisp and authoritative, "you may call your client to the stand." Poppy's heart pounded in her chest as she walked to the witness box. The wood felt cold and solid beneath her hand as she was sworn in, vowing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. She sat down, acutely aware of every eye in the room focused intently on her. Spencer still wouldn't look at her, but she could feel the heat of Bianca's unwavering glare, a silent expression of contempt. David began gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "Miss Petrova, could you please describe your relationship with your children, Leo and Luna?" "They are my world," Poppy said, her voice soft but clear, carrying with it the undeniable ring of truth. "From the moment they were born, I have been their primary caregiver. I feed them, I bathe them, I read to them every night. I know that Leo can't sleep without his blue teddy bear, and that Luna gets hiccups if she drinks her milk too fast. I know their favorite songs and their worst fears. I am their mother." David paused, allowing her words to resonate in the room. "Mr. Montgomery's petition claims you are unstable. How do you respond to that?" "I have been under a great deal of stress," Poppy admitted, refusing to shy away from the undeniable truth. "My husband of 4 years abandoned our family, cut me off financially, and is now trying to take my children away from me. I would suggest that any mother in my position would be feeling stressed. It is not instability. It is the pain of a mother fighting for her babies." She saw a flicker of something akin to understanding in Judge Carmichael's eyes. It wasn't sympathy, not yet, but it was undeniably attention. She was listening, truly listening. David continued, "Mr. Gideon mentioned an incident with a neighbor, Miss Jenkins. Could you explain what happened?" Poppy took a deep breath, steeling herself. "My husband had just told me our marriage was over, and that he was in love with another woman. He left. I was heartbroken, utterly devastated. And I was alone with 2 one-year-olds. I was crying, pleading with him on the phone. Yes, I was loud, undeniably so. I was devastated. But I never, not once, neglected my children. They were safe in their cribs the entire time." David then shifted the focus to Mr. Montgomery's involvement with the children over the last 6 months. This was the moment for which the photo album had been carefully preserved. David picked it up and approached the witness stand. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter this into evidence as Respondent's Exhibit A." He handed it to the bailiff, who then presented it to the judge. Judge Carmichael opened the album and began turning the pages slowly, meticulously studying each image. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the soft rustling of the pages. She saw the story unfold in pictures. The happy family, then the slowly absenting father, then the mother and children, alone but still smiling, their bond unbreakable. Her expression remained neutral, but she studied each photograph with intense focus, as if searching for some hidden truth within the images. Poppy's voice gained strength and conviction as she looked at the album in the judge's hands. Spencer was a wonderful father at first, but as his relationship with Miss Langley grew, his time with us shrank, becoming increasingly rare. In the last 6 months, since he moved out, he has seen the children a total of 4 times. Each visit lasted less than an hour. He has never once changed a diaper. He has never fed them a meal. He has never put them to bed. He calls himself their father, but he has essentially been a visitor in their lives. She then produced her own carefully compiled evidence. Printed emails and text messages documenting Spencer's neglect. "These are my attempts to arrange visits," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "Dozens of them. Here is his reply to my desperate request for him to attend their 2nd birthday party. Sorry, tied up with a closing. Here is his reply when I told him Leo had a high fever. Let me know what the doctor says. He didn't offer to come. He didn't even call to check on him." David presented the stack of damning papers to the bailiff. As Judge Carmichael reviewed them, a deep frown creased her forehead. The carefully constructed image of the concerned father was beginning to crack, revealing the cold indifference beneath. Poppy looked directly at Spencer, meeting his gaze for the first time since entering the courtroom. His eyes were cold and hard, filled with barely suppressed anger. He was furious that she was exposing him, stripping away his carefully constructed facade. "I may not have money right now, Spencer," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, directed as much at him as at the judge. "You made sure of that, didn't you? Our apartment may be small, but it is filled with love and unwavering security. Every single day, my children know they are loved. They know their mother will be there for them, no matter what challenges we face. Can you say the same? Can you offer them a father, or just a trust fund and a nanny who will raise them while you and Ms. Langley are busy with your closings and your charity galas?" The courtroom was silent, every breath held in anticipation. Bianca was whispering furiously into Spencer's ear, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Spencer's carefully cultivated facade of calm was gone, replaced by a sullen resentment that revealed his true nature. But then it was Mr. Gideon's turn for cross-examination. He rose slowly, his expression one of deep, sorrowful disappointment, designed to evoke sympathy. "Miss Petrova," he began, his voice dripping with faux concern, "I want to understand," dripping with condescension. "This is all very touching, a real tearjerker. A lovely story, but let's get real here. You don't have a job, am I right? I used to be a librarian, a career I walked away from to raise our kids at your husband's insistence. But you have no current income, correct?" "Yes." "And you were recently turned down for a credit card, weren't you?" "Yes." "And isn't it also true that your landlord has given you a heads up about your late rent? A preliminary eviction warning, perhaps?" Poppy's face burned with shame. It was the truth. "My husband refuses to give me any financial support. I'm doing the best I can." "Your best, Miss Petrova, just isn't cutting it," Gideon said, his voice suddenly sharp and laced with steel. "Your best is going to get you evicted. Your best means an empty bank account. Look, love is a wonderful feeling, but it won't buy groceries. It won't pay for health care. It certainly won't pay for a top-tier education. Mr. Montgomery isn't just offering a trust fund here. He's offering a future. You're offering love in a one-bedroom apartment you're about to get kicked out of. It's clear as day what this court should decide." He spun on his heel and walked back to his table, leaving Poppy feeling exposed and utterly humiliated. He had taken her heartfelt plea, the raw truth of her situation, and twisted it, weaponized it to paint her as incompetent. The glimmer of hope she had dared to feel just moments before vanished, replaced by that cold, familiar knot of dread in her stomach. She had laid her soul bare, and he had trampled all over it with the hard, ugly facts of her poverty. She looked at Judge Carmichael, desperate for some kind of sign, some indication of what the judge really thought, who she believed. But the judge's face was a stone wall, impenetrable. She simply jotted down another note, her expression giving absolutely nothing away. The silence in the courtroom was crushing, suffocating. But Mr. Gideon wasn't done yet. He had one more witness to call, and it was the one Poppy had been dreading the most. Their neighbor, Martha Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins was a lonely woman in her late 70s, and Spencer had always made it a point to mow her lawn or bring over her newspaper, small, calculated acts of kindness that had bought her loyalty. She hobbled to the witness stand, a frail woman with cloudy eyes who looked visibly uncomfortable. Gideon treated her with kid gloves, his voice soft and respectful, oozing sympathy. Mrs. Jenkins, you lived next door to the Montgomerys for 2 years, correct? Yes, that's right. They were a lovely young couple at first, so happy. And in the months leading up to Mr. Montgomery leaving the family home, did you notice any changes in Miss Petrova's behavior? Mrs. Jenkins fidgeted with her handbag, avoiding eye contact. Well, there was a lot of noise, crying, carrying on. The poor dear seemed very upset all the time. Did you ever hear shouting? Gideon prodded gently, his voice full of concern. Oh yes, quite a bit of shouting. And one evening, I heard a loud crash. Sounded like something breaking. Poppy closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her. It was the baby rattle. It had just fallen and hit the plastic side of the crib. Crash. This was how they did it. They took the smallest grain of truth and nurtured it, twisted it, until it became a monstrous lie. And were you concerned for the children, Mrs. Jenkins? Well, a mother in that state. You do worry. Spencer, Mr. Montgomery, he was always so calm and put together. It was a shame, a terrible shame. David's cross-examination was brief. He knew there wasn't much point in trying to bully an elderly woman who genuinely believed what she was saying. Mrs. Jenkins? David asked kindly. Did you ever see Miss Petrova harm her children? Oh heavens, no. She adored those babies. Did you ever see them looking hungry or uncared for? No, they were always dressed nicely, and she was always with them. So, what you're saying is that you heard a grieving wife, who had just been told that her husband was leaving her for another woman, crying and shouting in the privacy of her own home. Gideon shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. Objection. Counsel is leading the witness and mischaracterizing her testimony. Sustained, Judge Carmichael said, although her eyes were fixed on Mrs. Jenkins. Mr. Chun, rephrase your question. No further questions, Your Honor, David said, sighing. The damage, however small, was done. Another brushstroke had been added to Gideon's carefully crafted portrait of Poppy as an unstable woman teetering on the edge of a breakdown. Gideon rested his case with a flourish. Your Honor, the evidence is crystal clear. Mr. Montgomery offers a life of boundless opportunity for these children. Miss Petrova, despite her best intentions, offers a life of instability and impending poverty. The choice, when it comes to the children's welfare, is unequivocal. The room felt heavy, suffocating, with a sense of finality. Poppy felt like the walls were closing in on her. She had shared her truth, but it felt so fragile, so insignificant, next to the towering mountain of carefully manufactured evidence that Spencer's money had bought. She looked at the twins. Luna was still asleep on her lap, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically. Leah was looking at Spencer, her expression one of pure, innocent confusion. He lifted a small hand and gave a tiny wave. Dada, he whispered, his small voice piercing the oppressive silence. Spencer flinched as if he had been struck. For the first time, a genuine emotion flickered across his face, not anger, but something that looked suspiciously like shame. He quickly averted his gaze, turning his attention to Bianca, who immediately placed a possessive hand on his knee, as if staking her claim. And that's when everything changed. A shift in the dynamics of the entire room, almost palpable. It didn't begin with a shout or a dramatic accusation, but with the quiet rustle of paper. Judge Carmichael, who had been listening impassively to the proceedings, closed the thick main case file in front of her. Then, She reached to her side and pulled out a different folder, one that was thin and unmarked. She opened it, her eyes quickly scanning the first page. "Mr. Montgomery?" she began, her voice suddenly devoid of its earlier neutrality. Now, it had a sharp, steely edge that made the hairs on the back of Poppy's neck stand up. "I have a few questions for you myself." Spencer and Gideon exchanged a surprised, almost panicked look. This was definitely off script. "You have testified that your primary concern is the welfare and future of your children," the judge stated, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor, above all else," Spencer affirmed, a tremor in his voice, "and that this future is secured by your considerable financial assets, much of which is tied to the Montgomery family trust established by your late father. Correct?" Spencer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yes, that's correct. I have taken the liberty of reviewing the terms of that trust," Judge Carmichael said, her eyes never leaving his face. "It's a fascinating document. Your father, Robert Montgomery, was a very meticulous man, a stickler for detail." A flicker of fear, raw and undeniable, appeared in Spencer's eyes. Bianca, sensing the sudden shift in tone, sat up straighter, her expression becoming wary. "The trust stipulates," the judge continued, reading directly from a page in the new folder, "that the principal assets are to be managed by a board of trustees until you reach the age of 45. The income you draw is substantial, but you do not have direct control over the bulk of the fortune. Is that an accurate summary?" "Yes, Your Honor," Spencer said through gritted teeth, his jaw tight. "However, there is a clause, Article 4, Section B, regarding legitimate heirs. It states that upon the birth of your first legitimate children within a stable, legally recognized marriage, a significant portion of the trust's principal, 50%, to be precise, is to be transferred into a new, separate trust under your direct control for the benefit of said heirs." Gideon was on his feet now, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the details of my client's private financial arrangements are simply not relevant to this custody hearing." "Oh, I believe they are, Mr. Gideon," the judge retorted, her voice as cold as ice. "In fact, I believe they are the only thing relevant to this hearing. Because, you see, the trust also contains a morality clause." She flipped a page. "Article 5, Section C. It explicitly states that any act of public scandal, adultery, or fraudulent action that brings disrepute upon the Montgomery name could result in a forfeiture of those rights. The Board of Trustees would retain total control." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Tell me, Mr. Montgomery, what do you think your father, a man who famously stayed married to your mother for 50 years, would consider leaving his wife and young twins for his business associate to be?" The color completely drained from Spencer's face. He looked pale, almost ghostly. He was no longer the powerful real estate mogul, the confident man who held all the cards. He was a little boy who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "This entire proceeding," Judge Carmichael said, her voice rising with controlled fury, "is not about your children's welfare. It's about money. You needed to divorce Poppy, but you couldn't afford a scandal. So you concocted this elaborate story. You painted the mother of your children as unstable to secure sole custody, silence her with a meager payout, and ensure that the board of your father's trust saw you as the stable parent, thereby releasing tens of millions of dollars into your control." Poppy stared, completely dumbfounded. The judge saw it. She saw it all, right through the lies, the expensive suit, the rehearsed testimony. She saw the cold, hard truth. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned her piercing gaze away from the crumbling Spencer and settled it, with the force of a physical blow, on the woman sitting next to him. "However, it seems Mr. Montgomery isn't the only person in this room with secrets. Miss Langley, would you please stand?" Bianca looked utterly bewildered. I don't understand, Your Honor." "Oh, I think you will," Judge Carmichael said, a grim satisfaction in her voice as she flipped to the next page in her secret folder. "Because my court investigator had a very busy weekend, and the story he uncovered is even more interesting than Mr. Montgomery's financial desperation." The air in the courtroom crackled with a new, dangerous energy. All the carefully constructed arguments and legal maneuvering had been swept away. Judge Carmichael was no longer just a neutral arbiter. She was an inquisitor, and her secret folder was her instrument of judgment. Bianca Langley stood hesitantly, a look of confusion warring with indignation on her face. "Your Honor, I am not a party to this case. I don't see why I am being addressed." "You made yourself a party to this case, Miss Langley, when you conspired with Mr. Montgomery to defraud this court and strip a mother of her children," the judge said, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "And you did so under a false name." A collective gasp rippled through the small public gallery. Spencer swiveled his head to look at Bianca, his eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. Mr. Gideon looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "My name is Bianca Langley," she insisted, her voice rising an octave, cracking under the pressure. "I am a senior acquisitions associate at Paradigm Holdings." "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Judge Carmichael leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into slits. "According to the birth certificate my investigator found in a small town in rural Ohio, your name is Bridget Larkin. Does that name ring a bell?" Bianca's face went white as a sheet. The mask of cool, sophisticated confidence shattered completely, revealing the raw, primal fear that lay beneath. "That's not. I don't know who that is." "Let me refresh your memory," the judge continued, her voice relentless. "Bridget Larkin graduated high school with a less-than-stellar record. Moved to Chicago at 19, took a job as a paralegal at a firm specializing in high-net-worth divorces, a firm from which she was fired under suspicion of stealing client data. Sound familiar?" Poppy watched, mesmerized. This was a woman she didn't even recognize. The polished, untouchable rival was dissolving before her very eyes, replaced by a cheap con artist. "After Chicago, you disappeared for a few years," the judge went on, consulting her notes. "Then, a woman named Bella Lauren appeared in Miami. She became involved with a wealthy hotelier, a man twice her age. Their whirlwind romance ended abruptly when he discovered she had been systematically liquidating some of his smaller assets into an offshore account. He declined to press charges to avoid a scandal, but Bella Lauren vanished without a trace." Spencer made a choking sound, a strangled gasp. He was staring at the woman beside him as if she were a complete stranger. And then, 2 years ago, a Bianca Langley surfaced in Northern Virginia. Judge Carmichael concluded, her voice ringing with finality. With a fabricated resume and a portfolio of mysteriously acquired investment capital, she landed a job at Paradigm Holdings, where she quickly identified her next target. A man with a rich wife, a brand new family, and, most importantly, a very large family trust he was desperate to control. You didn't just stumble into Spencer Montgomery's life, you targeted him. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the bailiff seemed to be holding his breath. Leo and Luna were both awake now, watching the unfolding drama with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "This is slander," Bianca shrieked, her voice raw and panicked. "You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," the judge said calmly. She lifted a document from her folder. "This is a copy of a wire transfer from 3 months ago. A transfer for $50,000 made from Mr. Montgomery's personal account to a holding company." She held up a second document. "And this is the incorporation paper for that holding company. The sole director is listed as Bridget Larkin." Spencer slumped in his chair as if his strings had been cut. "She told me it was an investment," he mumbled, his voice laced with disbelief. "A real estate opportunity. She said it had to be discreet." "It was payment, Mr. Montgomery." Judge Carmichael corrected him coldly. "Payment for her expertise. She wasn't just your mistress. She was your business partner in a conspiracy. She knew about the morality clause in your father's trust. She learned it from her time as a paralegal. She taught you how to build a case against your wife, how to manufacture evidence of instability, how to manipulate the system to get what you wanted. She was the architect of Miss Petrova's misery. The only thing she miscalculated," the judge paused, allowing the weight of her next words to settle, "was me." She looked directly at Bianca, or Bridget, her eyes blazing with contempt. I've been on this bench for 30 years. I have seen every kind of greed and deception imaginable. I know the smell of a manufactured custody case the moment it walks into my courtroom. Mr. Gideon's arguments were too perfect, Mr. Montgomery's narrative was too polished, and your presence here, she nodded at Bianca, was a declaration of victory before the battle had even been fought. It made me curious. So, I had my investigator do some digging. She closed the folder with a soft, definitive thud. You preyed on this man's greed, Miss Larkin, and together, you were willing to destroy a family for financial gain. You were going to take these two beautiful children from their loving mother and raise them as pawns in your financial schemes. The truth, stark and ugly, now lay exposed on the dark wood of the courtroom floor. Spencer's motivation wasn't love or a new life. It was avarice. Bianca's motivation wasn't love either. It was a cold, calculated con. And Poppy was the obstacle they had tried to bulldoze. Poppy felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of white-hot anger. They hadn't just tried to divorce her. They had tried to erase her. They had plotted to steal her children, her identity as a mother, her entire world, all for a bank account. The carefully constructed world of Spencer Montgomery and Bianca Langley had not just cracked. It had been utterly demolished, and the fallout was about to begin. For a long moment nobody moved. The silence was a living thing, thick with the wreckage of exposed lies. Spencer sat frozen, his face a mask of utter devastation. He wasn't just facing a lost custody battle. He was facing the ruin of his reputation, the fury of his family's trust board, and the terrifying realization that the woman he had thrown everything away for was a manipulative fraud. But Bianca, or Bridget, was not a woman who accepted defeat. Her fear, cornered and raw, morphed into something else entirely. Pure, unrestrained rage. The transformation was terrifying. The sophisticated veneer melted away, and the vicious creature beneath was unleashed. Her head snapped toward Spencer. "You," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the courtroom. "You weak, pathetic fool. I handed you the playbook, and you couldn't even run the play right." Spencer recoiled as if she had physically struck him. "You lied to me," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "Everything. It was all a lie." "Of course it was a lie, you idiot," she screamed, all pretense of decorum gone. She jabbed a finger, not at Spencer, but at Poppy. "I did it to get away from the whining, pathetic little librarian and her screaming brats. You were supposed to handle it. You were supposed to get rid of them." Leo, startled by the sudden shouting, began to cry. His small, frightened sob seemed to fuel Bianca's fury. "Shut that thing up!" she shrieked, her face contorted with hate. "This is all your fault." Her wild eyes locked onto Poppy. "You think you've won? You think you get to keep the money, the life? I will ruin you. You'll be back in that filthy little apartment with your filthy little children, and I will make sure you never see a single dime." Mr. Gideon, looking utterly mortified, tried to intervene. "Ms. Langley, I strongly advise you to remain silent. You shut up too." She spat at him. "You're all useless." This was the moment she lost all control. The primal, desperate core of the con artist was laid bare for all to see. With a guttural scream of pure rage, Bianca lunged. She didn't lunge at Spencer or the judge. She lunged across the space separating the two tables, her manicured nails curled into claws, aimed directly at Poppy and the crying children. "I'll kill you!" she screamed, her eyes wild and unfocused. It happened in a split second. David Chun threw himself in front of Poppy protectively. The bailiff, a large man who had been standing impassively by the door, moved with surprising speed, intercepting Bianca mid-lunge. He wrapped his arms around her, pinning her flailing limbs. "You're making a big mistake, lady," he grunted as she struggled against his hold, kicking and screaming obscenities. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Leo's crying intensified into terrified wails. Luna jolted awake and joined him. Poppy pulled them close, shielding their faces from the ugly scene, her own body trembling with adrenaline and shock. Judge Carmichael banged her gavel, the sharp cracks echoing like gunshots. "Order!" Order in this court. Bailiff, remove Larkin immediately. Let go of me. Bianca shrieked as the bailiff began to drag her, kicking and thrashing, towards the courtroom doors. He promised me. Spencer, you promised me. Spencer didn't respond. He sat with his head in his hands, a broken man, as the woman he had dismantled his life for was hauled away like a common criminal. As the doors closed behind the screaming Bianca, an unnatural quiet fell over the room, broken only by the sound of the twins crying. Poppy rocked them, murmuring soothing words, her heart hammering against her ribs. Judge Carmichael surveyed the scene, her face grim. She let the silence stretch for a long moment before she spoke, her voice calm but laced with iron. Well, she said, looking down at the wreckage of Spencer Montgomery's case. I believe that clarifies things. She looked at Mr. Gideon, who looked pale and shaken. Mr. Gideon, given the revelations of the last 20 minutes, including perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a violent outburst in my courtroom, do you have anything further to add in support of your client's petition for sole custody? Gideon swallowed hard. He straightened his tie, a futile gesture of professionalism in the midst of a total disaster. No, Your Honor. The plaintiff withdraws the petition. I should think so, the judge said dryly. She then turned her gaze to Spencer. He looked up, his eyes hollow and defeated. Mr. Montgomery, she said, and now her voice was devoid of all sympathy. You have committed a grave offense. You have abused the justice system. You have conspired to defraud your own family's trust. And you have attempted to use this court to maliciously strip a fit and loving mother of her children for your own financial gain. This is not just a failed divorce strategy. This is an act of profound moral corruption. She paused, letting her words sink in. The custody petition is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Ms. Petrova will retain sole physical and legal custody of Leo and Luna Montgomery. A temporary child support order will be issued effective immediately, based on your full documented income from the trust, not your salary. I am ordering you to pay for Ms. Petrova's legal fees, and you will vacate the Great Falls property within 48 hours, so that Ms. Petrova and your children can move back into their home. Poppy gasped. Move back home. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice like granite. I am referring this entire case to the district attorney's office for a potential criminal investigation into conspiracy and perjury for both you and Miss Larkin. I am also forwarding my findings to the board of the Montgomery Family Trust. I have a feeling they will be very interested in Article 5, Section C. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Spencer's life. He had lost everything. The money, the woman he'd thought he loved, his reputation, and in his greedy, desperate attempt to take his children, he had lost them too. The judge finally looked at Poppy. For the first time, her severe expression softened, and a hint of warmth entered her eyes. Miss Petrova, she said, her voice gentle, you have endured a great deal. You have conducted yourself with dignity and courage. You are a good mother. Go home and take care of your children. This court will ensure you have the resources to do so. Tears streamed down Poppy's face. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of profound, overwhelming relief. She hugged her children tight, burying her face in their soft hair. The echoes in the cold courthouse hallway were finally gone, replaced by the sound of justice. 2 days later, Poppy stood in the foyer of the house in Great Falls. It was strange to be back. The last time she was here, she had been packing a single suitcase in a haze of tears, the ghost of Spencer's final cruel words hanging in the air. Now the house was silent. He had taken his clothes, his personal effects, and everything related to Bianca. What remained was the life they had built before her, the life of a family. Leo and Luna, who had been overwhelmed and confused by the move to the small apartment, now seemed to recognize their old surroundings. They toddled unsteadily into the large living room, their faces lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. Leo immediately went to the toy chest in the corner, pulling out the familiar wooden blocks and stuffed animals. Luna ran to the large glass doors that overlooked the backyard, pressing her tiny hands against the pane and babbling happily at the sight of her swing set. For the first time in 6 months, Poppy felt like she could breathe. The crushing weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long had finally lifted. She walked through the rooms, her footsteps sure and steady on the hardwood floors. This wasn't Spencer's house anymore. It was her children's home. It was her sanctuary, a refuge she had fought so hard to reclaim. David Chen, her lawyer, had called that morning, his voice practically vibrating with excitement. The initial child support payment had already been wired into her brand-new bank account. The sum was astonishing, vastly exceeding anything she could have imagined. The judge had stayed true to her word, calculating the payment based on Spencer's actual income from the trust, not the ridiculously low poultry salary he had reported on paper. The Montgomery Trust Board, David relayed, had convened an emergency meeting. Their lawyers were already in contact with him. Apparently, they were moving to invoke the morality clause. Spencer was likely to be cut off completely, his future inheritance redirected to a new trust, managed solely for the benefit of the twins, and completely inaccessible to him. As for Bianca, or Bridget Larkin as she was really known, she had been charged with contempt of court and assault and was also under investigation for fraud. Her carefully constructed life had crumbled into ashes. Spencer, facing his own mounting legal woes and intense public humiliation, had apparently skipped town. He hadn't even tried to contact Poppy or the children. It was as if he had simply vanished, a ghost from a former life that no longer existed. That evening, after giving the twins a bath in their own familiar tub, surrounded by their favorite bath toys, and tucking them into their beds in their own rooms, tucked in tight with their favorite stuffed animals, Poppy sat alone in the quiet living room. A gentle autumn rain tapped rhythmically against the windows. She had actually done it. She had faced the monster head-on and she had won. She hadn't achieved this with money or power, but with a mother's fierce, unwavering love and the simple, unshakable power of the truth. She thought of Judge Mildred Carmichael, a woman who could have so easily accepted the polished lies that had been presented to her with such confidence. But instead, she had looked deeper beneath the surface. She had seen the raw desperation in a young mother's eyes and the unadulterated greed in a rich man's heart, and she had consciously chosen to seek true justice. Poppy knew she owed that woman a debt she could never possibly repay. Her phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. It was a text message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to open it. "This is Martha Jenkins from next door. I saw the lights on in your living room. I am so terribly sorry for my testimony in court. I was a foolish old woman who was completely taken in by his lies. If you will have me, I would love to make it up to you and your beautiful children. I bake a wonderful apple pie." Poppy smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached all the way to her eyes, crinkling the corners. She typed back a simple reply. "We would love that. Thank you so much." She realized she was not alone in this world. She had her beautiful children. She had her cozy home. And she had a future that was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely her own to design and live. She looked out the window at the rain-washed world, a profound sense of peace settling over her like a warm, comforting blanket. The storm was finally over. A brand new day was dawning on the horizon. Poppy's incredible story is a testament to the fact that the power of a mother's unwavering love and the undeniable force of the truth can overcome even the most daunting lies. In a courtroom that often seemed designed to favor the wealthy and powerful, her quiet courage exposed a complex web of greed and deceit, proving that true justice can ultimately prevail when the right person is willing to listen with an open heart and mind. Her victory wasn't just a victory for her and her family. It was a victory for anyone who has ever felt powerless against seemingly insurmountable odds. If this deeply moving story of resilience and ultimate justice touched your heart in any way, please show your support by hitting the like button below, sharing it with a friend, and subscribing to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Thank you so much for watching.